Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. And today I've got Andrew Peel with us, coming to us from the Toronto area in Canada. And I look forward to really talking about a topic that I keep getting asked a lot about is Passivhaus. But really part of today's discussion is we might get into renewables, to talk about carbon. Yeah, there's different programs out there. I'm just really excited to have Andrew on, who is an expert at several of these topics. So Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I love these conversations with green building professionals, and I love it when we have an international guest on. You know, I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I get to travel a good bit for the trainings we do, the projects we work on. And so let's talk a little bit about where you got your start. So where did you grow up and where did you go to school?
Well, I grew up outside of Toronto in the suburbs of Mississauga. Spent, most of my formative years there. And sort of just regular suburban life. So can't say there was anything particularly notable about it. And then I think you asked me about the school. Where did I go?
Yeah, like college. You know, I know you've got some advanced degrees. So tell us a little bit about what it was like, you know, college, what'd you major in, and kind of maybe you went back and got a master's. Tell us about that.
Sure, yeah. So I went to a university known in Canada, not so well known outside, called Queen's University. It's also in Ontario. And I did electrical engineering. That was my undergrad degree. And I sort of had an interest in I'd say probably computers earlier on, going back to high school. That kind of veered a bit more into the electrical side. So I decided to end up majoring in that. And so I was kind of all set for a career in electrical engineering. And I just had what developed in me was an interest in renewable energy as I was in undergrad. And what I was finding, there wasn't really much available to learn. Like there's the odd course that kind of covered it in brief or not, but it wasn't really much there. So since I wanted to get into the renewable energy space, I started to look for opportunities. Couldn't get any real education in the undergrad, so looked for job opportunities. And this is back in 2004 or 5. And at the time, the renewable sector was really a cottage industry. So, I'd go to like Solar Energy Society of Canada's annual conference, and there'd be maybe 4 vendors and, a couple of people installing PV systems on the roofs. And I'd ask them about jobs and they'd just laugh at me.
Yeah, right.
Right. So I realized in order for me to get my foot in the door, I think it'd be good to do a master's program. And so I started to look within Canada for a program. There wasn't really anything available. Like there are people doing primary research. So solar cell technology research, looking to improve the efficiency. But actually my girlfriend at the time was living with somebody who was completing her master's at the University of Toronto in solar research. And after speaking to her, she was telling me how she spent 2 years improving the efficiency of solar cells by 0.1%. It's great you're doing that, but I don't want to spend 2 years doing that. And then when I looked further afield in the US, it was the same story. People doing primary research, but nothing really kind of led into jobs outside of research. So I started to look further afield, and there's actually a professor I'd worked with who was in the renewable space, but again, he was doing primary research. He was aware of a couple master's programs in Europe. And so I just looked into them and decided, okay, let's take a punt. They weren't certainly known much in North America, but so I ended up at a school in Germany that had a program dedicated to renewable energy. And it was I mean, it existed since the late 80s. So it was the oldest program in the world. They had great faculty, great alumni network. And so it turned out really well. Wow. It's just this like unknown school. I talked to anyone who wasn't from Germany, and they'd never heard of the town or the city that the university was in.
Now, is that how you got an early stint at BRE and Bream early in the career? So you really kind of bounced right into kind of the green building side of things? Because I'm always curious, how'd you get that start? It sounds like you're passionate about renewables. You're really curious. Was there kind of an aha moment you wanted to make a career out of green buildings? Like, tell us a little more about that.
Sure. Yeah. It was actually during the master's program where, I guess thinking more like almost philosophically about energy generation, I came to the conclusion in my mind that it was easier to save a kilowatt hour than try to figure out different alternative ways of actually generating that kilowatt hour. And that's what got me interested in energy efficiency and ultimately building energy efficiency. And it was just through, a bit of luck really that I found the Passivhaus Institute in Germany that, I hadn't heard of them before. Again, my background is a lot of construction from education. So, they just happened, they had this lowly website and I managed to find it and found an opportunity with them. I actually I ended up doing my master's thesis at the Institute as well as worked there. And I worked on their software, the Passivhaus planning package. So it's like Passivhaus energy modeling software. So that's ultimately how I got started into the green building space. And I feel like I'm fortunate that I kind of started at the source of, where this now worldly applied standard, international building standard for highly energy efficient, high performance, comfortable, high quality indoor, like all the things that come with Passivhaus. That I basically found that the organization that had put that together. So that's how I ended up getting started in Passivhaus. I worked there for a while, and then I jumped over to the UK, where you mentioned BRE, the Building Research Establishment, was, and so I got a job with them and worked for them for maybe 4 or 5 years, and that was both in the Passivhaus space as well as more generally in sustainable buildings, and worked as well on I managed the low carbon building technology program on behalf of the UK government. So we had a contract where any manufacturer or supplier who had a device they were claiming or system or component they were claiming carbon savings for, we would assess that product. So we developed testing and calculation methodologies to properly assess what kind of savings these technologies actually would how much carbon it would actually save.
Really good opportunity young in your career there. Well, tell us about, did you have any mentors along the way, or anyone that kind of you looked up to, anyone that influenced you, or maybe they did open a door? Any mentors along the way?
Certainly not in the sustainable building or renewable energy space. It was just something I was drawn to, and I just found my own path. Because again, there wasn't really much going on in North America at the time, so I didn't really have anyone to look to. So yeah, it was just really about carving my own path. Yeah,
no, that's awesome. That's what a lot of listeners here need to hear as well. It's you were out there and you made it happen. So, well, what are some of your proudest achievements? And then in a minute, we'll talk more about what you do with Peel Passivhaus. But just looking back on this career, I love to give my podcast guests some permission to look at the highlight reel and what stands out. Brag a little bit. What are some of your proudest achievements so far?
That's great. Yeah, because we often don't take acknowledge, give receive acknowledgement. Yeah, I think actually most recently we've completed the world's first Passivhaus car dealership.
Oh wow, cool.
Which some people find really almost like an oxymoron, side by side. But yeah, up in Red Deer, Alberta, so it's in Canada, and the owner, he's not an environmentalist, but it's a family-run business. They actually just celebrated their 50th anniversary in 2018, and they just found that applying Passivhaus to their dealership really aligned with their views, around long-term value, around good space for their employees, for occupants, like customers. Obviously, lower energy bills, helpful, more durable construction. Yeah, basically with that value or the eye for long-term. They saw a great alignment.
No, it's awesome. I mean, there's, we have to accept there's going to be a lot of buildings built, a lot of buildings renovated. Sure, if we can go through certain certification programs as best practices to make it a better building that hopefully is energy efficient, less harmful to the environment, a better place for those workers to work in. I mean, we definitely can justify it. So it's pretty cool that you got that certification there. So anything else stand out though you're really, proud of as you look back?
Yeah, like specific things. I mean, certainly proud of carving my own path, like, and not really like being always committed to the work, like the vision of transforming the construction industry so that we're building buildings to Passivhaus performance levels across the board, and really creating a company. My company is now 8 years old, and when I founded it, there was very little happening in the Passivhaus space. I mean, it was the odd house that was going up, and so actually just remaining committed and not taking on work that doesn't align with the mission or the vision. So it's really about creating a mission-based or vision-based organization.
Well, let's peel back that onion a little bit. So what drives you, especially if you feel like you were out there doing it by yourself? Like, is it to make the world a better place? Is it just this is the right way to do it? It's if you're going to be in business and be an entrepreneur, you want to be in this industry. And tell me a little more like, if you peel back that onion, so to speak, like, what really keeps you fired up?
I mean, since I was young, I've had there in the background some, environmental thinking. I can't say it was very strong as a kid, or nor did I take a lot of action. But, I remember even when I was like 8 years old, I'd like reuse strings, to tie things up. I remember being excited about when they first started to recycle juice boxes in school. And so it's kind of been a thread throughout my life. It wasn't until looking at a career that it really became more prominent and started to integrate it more in my life. And so certainly there's the environmental side of things. I definitely like better quality things. I've learned my lesson enough times of buying something cheap and it breaking down quickly, and like investing, making an investment in the thing that you're going to make the biggest investment in your life, your home, that you're investing for the long term. You're investing in something more durable, better quality, that gives you better indoor air quality. I mean, I could consider listing benefits of Passivhaus. It just makes so much sense. Like when you think of same that, why like spend a bit more money up front, and sometimes you don't even have to, but even if you have to, just to make something that's going to give you a much better product that you're going to enjoy over its lifetime. It just makes so much more sense.
Absolutely. No. So let's kind of fast forward to today, because I want to learn more about your company, but I want to learn more about Passivhaus. This is a topic that, we teach a lot about LEED and well and fit well and, even living building and some other things. But Passivhaus keeps coming up, and more, of the architects, engineers, contractors, especially we work with, they want to learn more here. So if you could tell us a little more about Passivhaus, maybe what are some things that maybe we should know that maybe are misconceived in the marketplace? Is it only for residential? I mean, is it light commercial? How big of a building could we use Passivhaus? So could you give us a little lay of the land on, Passivhaus, then maybe some projects you're currently working on, and we'll see where that goes.
Sure, yeah. So fundamentally, a Passivhaus can be applied to any building type. I mean, stretching, from your single-family homes through large multi-unit, or there are some high-rise buildings. Well, there was one already in New York that was built, and more are on their way across the world. Applies to all sorts of non-residential buildings. I just mentioned this car dealership, museums, police stations, schools, offices. I mean, you name it, but it's there. So Passivhaus is a bit of a misnomer. It's also a bit of a mistranslation. So there's been confusion, but I think as the market's evolving, that confusion is kind of dissipating, and people are just seeing Passivhaus as a building standard, not focusing on the house side of things. And it's gaining much more traction around the world, and particularly in North America. We see certain hotbeds like in Vancouver, in New York. We're seeing projects here in Southern Ontario. Yeah, I mean, and this is happening both in cases where there's policy, like the city of Vancouver actually has specific policy where they require Passivhaus certification in depending on the situation, with like rezoning projects. Others, it's strictly voluntary, but the owners are actually seeing value. It's quite popular in affordable housing space. Because we have long-term owners. We're actually working with an organization now on a 20-story tower retrofit. So we're doing a Passivhaus retrofit of this building. It's in Windsor, Ontario, which is just across the river from Detroit. And the organization spends half of their operating budget on energy, which is, I've not heard of such a figure. So they're highly motivated to save energy. And, the Passivhaus retrofit will achieve a lot of that.
Well, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot more. There's a lot more to the program than I think some of us that maybe have been focused only on LEED for a number of years would think. So help us understand, when would you apply, say, Passivhaus instead of LEED, or have there ever been projects that do both? I guess, what kind of clients are you recommending it? Is it more because it's coming over more internationally and LEED has done a good job to keep some other programs out of the U.S.? I don't know. Tell us what's realistically happening out there with a program like Passivhaus compared to, say, even LEED or even LEED for homes.
Passivhaus is a bit more narrow but deeper, so it focuses on energy performance, indoor air quality, occupant comfort, and so it does a deep dive in those areas and does them well. It's got a great track record of delivering on its promise. So the energy modeling we do to predict how much energy the building's actually going to be used, we go through a fairly rigorous process that needs to be, the design ultimately needs to be built, but there are, as part of that quality assurance process that certification brings, Passivhaus certification, creates certainty in the construction of the building as well. And so, we see it, they actually perform as expected consistently. And this is true of different building types, right? Not just of homes. We don't generally have to sell Passivhaus because clients are coming to us because they want Passivhaus. I mean, that's the whole idea of, I created a company focused on Passivhaus, and they built that reputation of the company so that people seek us out. So it's not a matter of selling one versus the other. I mean, sometimes there are discussions when clients aren't fully committed as to what are the advantages. And certainly Passivhaus can marry well with other standards like LEED. So whereas LEED is much broader, right? It's covering elements that you don't see with Passivhaus, material selection, among other things. And so we see projects where they'll actually pursue both. So they can be complementary. And I think where people have turned to Passivhaus sometimes and not LEED would be where they really want the energy or CO2 savings. Whereas LEED there's been great examples, highly efficient, really saving a lot of CO2. And there were cases where a certified LEED building, they maybe hadn't put as much focus on energy efficiency or carbon savings, and so they can have kind of equivalent certification in LEED, but quite different outcomes in terms of carbon or energy savings.
Yeah, no, thanks for demystifying that. Even for me, focus on energy kind of mandated, or that's how we're going to hit our energy goals in some areas. And then, of course, the air side of it. So one of my previous guests, when we talked about Passivhaus, there was something that I wanted you to maybe help with too, is on the air quality side. As I understand it, you maybe want a much more airtight building and you really control that outside fresh air more precisely than just a breathable envelope. So can you speak to that for a minute? Do you end up with overall better air quality and outside fresh air instead of relying on, a building envelope that, maybe letting air in or conditioned air out where you don't want it? Can you speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the aspects of Passivhaus that both anecdotally and empirically through data monitoring or indoor air quality monitoring has demonstrated that yes, Passivhaus deliver superior indoor air quality, whether it's through CO2 measuring programs or when building owners agree to install CO2 monitoring systems, or when we talk to clients or the occupants of buildings and just get their feedback. And that's really down to both how Passivhaus approaches ventilation system design, as well as the requirements on controls and CO2 levels. And so it blends well, like the air quality side with energy efficiency. So it won't compromise on indoor air quality, but it tries to deliver that in as energy efficient manner as possible.
Good. No, that's fantastic. Thanks for taking us there. Well, tell us some more about what's keeping you busy today, Andrew. Do you focus more on like the consultant side of Passivhaus? Do you do some design there? Like, tell us what kind of work you do at your firm, and walk us through that process.
Sure. Yeah, we have a few major services. One being Passivhaus consultancy. So that's where we will support clients, design teams, developers, or even other consultants with Passivhaus design and construction. Right from start to finish of the projects. We have deep expertise with Passivhaus. So sometimes we'll be working with other qualified Passivhaus practitioners who, may not have experience with certain building types, or, and we don't have experience with every building type. Like the car dealership we worked on, I'd never worked on a car dealership. I didn't know much about it, but we brought our kind of Passivhaus thinking and design philosophy and experience to the project team, which, did have experience with car dealerships. So consulting is a big part. We do certification. So unlike other systems like LEED, where all the certification goes through either the USGBC or in Canada, it's CAGBC, with the Passivhaus certification, building certification, we actually are contracted to the Institute in Germany, and there are other certifiers operating in North America as well. So we kind of essentially compete. I mean, we work obviously to the same standard, but there are, options for teams who want to employ a certifier.
Can you certify your own projects?
No, there is a strict separation there. So if we are a consultant on a project, we ourselves would have to find another certifier.
Gotcha. And I have to assume a lot of the costs are going to be in the actual, type building envelope, maybe some more efficient systems. But, is there a certain cost comparison or range? Like, if someone want to do this on a project, is it a 1% premium, 5%? I don't know. How do you answer the cost question? It's, hey, not too much more, but your payback is so fast. Look how much more energy efficient we are. So, what's the premium to do Passivhaus?
Yeah, that's the common question that comes up. And I generally, I view it a bit differently now. I'm trying to steer the discussion a bit differently, where it's like, okay, as a client, what's your budget? What's your square foot, dollars per square foot cost? It might be a range there. And okay, well, let's work to that and deliver Passivhaus within that budget, as opposed to trying to design a conventional building and then slap Passivhaus on top. Where we've had projects that try to shoehorn design into Passivhaus, then yes, it's inevitably going to be more expensive and sometimes noticeably more expensive.
No, it's smart. Oh, it's smart. I like that. Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you for walking us through that and tell us more what you're working on today. Let's talk about the future of this sustainability and green building movement. If you had a crystal ball, what should we be reading up on now? What's around the corner?
My experience, we're seeing more desire to see reliable results that actually buildings deliver the actual CO2 savings that are expected or thought are going to come from applying better building standards, regardless of the rating system. Just the pressing need for action on climate change has, more and more jurisdictions, we're more in touch with those in North America, but I'm sure around the world look to say, okay, how can we address this? The buildings is obviously a big sector, a big contributor. And so I think there's been enough history of, promises not delivered on that this is a greater focus. And I think that's why some jurisdictions are pointing to Passivhaus, because they realize, okay, this is a proven concept.
No, that makes sense. So we got to make sure we do these third-party certifications, not just to validate it, but let's take it further and make sure it really is accurate. It's something we can use for operations and everyone can trust it even more. So that's good, man. Thank you.
And I think, just to expand on that, like ultimately what's important to me, we've picked Passivhaus, not to say, it's a winner. Like it's like, it delivers on so much in my mind. And yet what's most important for me at the end of the day, when we talk about industry transformation is, do we have appropriate targets being set to meet our climate objectives, to meet all of our objectives that we want the buildings to deliver on? And sorry, I lost my other point. Do we have the targets, and do we have the appropriate processes to ensure we actually deliver on those targets without that that suitable quality assurance process, or we won't say useless, but certainly not as impactful. And so that's what I really feel the Passivhaus certification brings, is that rigor in quality assurance. And so if we can apply that generally to construction industry, whether you label and seal or certify a building as a Passivhaus isn't ultimately the most important thing.
No, that's good. No, thank you very much. Well, let's go through some rapid fire questions here. What do you think is your specialty or gift? What are you best at?
It's certainly quick thinking. I can kind of deconstruct or analyze problems fairly quickly. I think lateral thinking would be, but like I can think in different. So I've got strong technical background, but, being a business owner, I'd say successful business owner, I can think in terms of business owner and that way of thinking, and sort of an openness to new ideas and collaboration. I think actually it speaks more generally to the industry. It's still quite competitive, and I want to breed more like collaboration amongst, even in our Passivhaus space where there's quite a bit of collaboration, a lot of sharing. There's still this undercurrent of like competition. And I think if we're going to transform the market, we need to be working more and more together. And so I think my openness to, I won't say we'll go to business, but like, that there's good, healthy competition there for that everyone's doing it basically.
Yeah. No, well, I want to unpack that more because, here at our education company, we've helped over 100,000 people around the world study and pass their LEED exam. So on one hand, you can be like, hey, we're creating more competition, we're consultants this or engineer that. But no, it's, a rising tide lifts all boats. But I want to talk about partnerships because I think old school business, maybe a client might assume, oh, you don't have that skill set in-house, but you're partnering out there in industry. So you mentioned on the dealership, you brought in an expert, maybe, you're prime on it. You're the client relationship, but you're going to bring in some experts to make sure this is a great project. If anything, there's more experts together on their assignment, keep it within budget. But, how do we break down that perception of, oh, we're not big enough or we don't have that experience? How do we make sure we're teaming up more? What would you suggest?
Yeah, well, because for the car dealership, like we were brought in as the experts, like the architect had done Passivhaus, but wanted our extra level of expertise. He was open, like, it's a kind of, there wasn't that ego of like, oh, I can do it all, we'll figure it out. It was like, okay, well, yeah, we need some support. Who can we look to bring that support in? We do that as well, where there's an area, even if it's like a deeper area of building physics that we're like, okay, that's outside of our, more than just outside of our comfort zone. It's just like we couldn't competently advise on this. We'll want to bring somebody on board. So it's really about the attitude of the team members as well as willingness for the client to accept that. So I don't know if there's like a silver bullet answer to that or solution, but to me, fundamentally, a lot of it's about attitude. And I see this with I'd rather have a green team. So it's a team that's never done Passivhaus and they're just learning even the basics, but they have the right attitude of like, yes, we want to engage on this. We want to learn. We want to be successful versus somebody with more experience, but they're really stuck in their ways of thinking or doing or solutions they've come up with before. Because often on our projects, we're having to come up with quite creative solutions because no one's really figured it out before.
Right. No, that makes sense. So yeah, better attitude. And then I think what you just did here, and that's what I'd suggest to everybody listening, that there needs to be more partnerships out there. I know at my businesses this year, I want to make sure we have a lot more partnerships, is give examples. Just show, hey, here's an example of where we had a successful partnership. It turned out to be a great project. So I think the more people see examples of partnerships in industry. So thanks for that. I appreciate it. Well, let's talk about just productivity. Do you have any routines or rituals that kind of help you stay on point, help you stay successful? Any best practices you could share?
Yeah, and this is an evolving thing for me. I realized actually with, I'm really a personal coach, but it was like, anyways, I've been doing this personal professional development work, and leader of one of the programs pointed out that as things develop, evolve, like, you have to revisit your structure, how you structure your day, because the game you're playing, the level you're operating at has shifted. You're operating at a higher level. Like maybe that structure isn't suitable. And so this is kind of an ongoing evolution for me. Certainly one of the routines I have, been doing for probably half a year now, and I'm seeing benefit, is the morning meditation. I do, very specific meditation to learn from this book. It's really about kind of reshaping your way of thinking and kind of create more, being a creator of your life and your world, like an author of your world. And so this meditation practice supports that thinking, that way of approaching life.
It's awesome. That sounds like just be really intentional. So, and that's a good segue to one of my other questions. We'll go ahead and go there about books. I don't know if you like to listen to like audiobooks or pick up a book in your hands, but is there another book or two you would recommend?
Yeah, it's funny. I usually, in conversation, somebody will say, "Oh, I really like this book," and we'll talk about it. And then, like right away, I've got my Amazon account. I'll just I've got a Kindle, so I'll just download a sample. So I'm like, okay, I'll look at it later. And then fortunately and unfortunately, my list of samples just keeps growing. So I never quite get to all these books. But one of the books that has been very impactful for me is actually related to this whole meditation practice I've been doing called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And it's great because he's got a series of books. His previous books were more focused on the theory. He's a researcher. He's done a lot of tens, hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I don't know how many. These tens of thousands of brain scans at least using a particular technology, and so they've been able to see how the brain is actually operating. Like blood flow and other. I don't know the technical details, but they've uncovered a lot of interesting things about the brain and its operation. And he's then developed this meditation practice based on that research. And this is all with this whole idea of like, how can you kind of reshape your brain, rewire your brain to be, to operate in a way that you much more want in your life, right? So, if there's a certain way, if you're prone to anger or anxiety or whatever, that you can shift that through rewiring your brain through this practice to operate in something that's more desirable in your life.
That's so cool, man. No, I think I've actually heard a podcast with him on another podcast, the Ed Milet podcast. So that's fantastic. Let's talk about just a couple more questions here. I'm really enjoying this. Bucket list. Are there one or two things on your bucket list you could share?
Yeah, I can't say I have a formal bucket list. I mean, a really cool thing to do would be go to space. I get motion sickness. I'm like, you talk about a bucket, like, well, I'd probably need a bucket on the way up. But I think that's a
big one. That is a first. I've had over 100 podcast interviews, and I want you to know you win the prize for the furthest. And I think that's awesome, and that's probably not too far out, right? So that is pretty cool, man. Going to space.
Well, and funny enough, a recent colleague, somebody's kind of become a friend recently, actually in this. The professional personal development work I've been doing. We're doing this one course together, and she just got up in front of the course one day, and the leader was just, leading her through some questions, exploring her own life. And then, she's like, "Oh, do you have anything to share?" And then suddenly she was just like, "Oh yeah, and I want to like develop a space program that has it so that people can easily come to space," right? And like, oh, and they're totally off the radar. I didn't expect this from her, but that's kind of put space a bit more in my mind recently. If we can find a really cost-effective environmental way of doing that, I think that would be cool.
I really hope our paths continue to help each other in this green building movement. But one day I want you to text me or call me after you go to space and come back, because I want to know that maybe I had a little hand in that, nudged you a little bit. Okay.
All right. Okay. Sounds
good, man. You gotta look back on the highlight reel. You got to look forward to some things. Sometimes part of it's the anticipation. That's what we get excited about. You got to be intentional. So I love where our conversation's gone here. But as we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about, green building careers. There are some listening here to the podcast, our loyal listeners. I love every single one of them. And, some are lead fellows. They've been doing this for 10, 15 years, and sometimes they need another spark or validation. Oh, Passivhaus, man, I just got a little more intel there. I'm going to go look into that more. And then sometimes it's someone that's newer, maybe just got into this green building movement, and they need some encouragement. So, two-part question. Is there any advice you wish you'd had earlier in your career?
Earlier in my career? I think because I carved out my own path. I mean, the advice I was getting, I remember one, like the girlfriend of a friend, she was from Germany. She actually studied in Canada. And she was like, I wouldn't go to Germany. Like, I don't like what's happening in the country, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I didn't heed her advice at all. So it's like, part of that is really about getting a vision for your life and your career. Like what really motivates you, is passionate about you, and kind of take action towards that despite what others may say. Like, carve your own path. There's always some level of realism or whatever, but it's like, do what you're passionate about. That's always, I mean, I've always I've never been driven by money. Now my business is more successful, so I'm seeing the fruits of that, but it's really about what do I want to be doing on a day-to-day basis. And I've been fortunate throughout my career. I've always had interesting projects that keep me engaged. I'm always learning. So always find opportunities to learn and grow.
I love it. That's good stuff. So then finally, just, here you are growing a business. You're an expert in this field. Any words of encouragement for someone, though, that is just now jumping into the green building movement? Are they early? Are they late? Like, any words of encouragement here?
Well, I certainly think what I just shared really applies for young folks. I think Passivhaus is a great space to get into. It's growing. We're seeing more and more projects, and whether it's commercial developers or public institutions like universities or whatnot, like people are saying, okay, we want Passivhaus. And then now it's like the big architect firms, big construction management firms are saying, oh, okay, they want to do Passivhaus. Let's figure out how to do this. So we're getting serious companies now in this space. So if you're into green buildings, into low carbon buildings like that, this is a great opportunity.
Love it. Well, Andrew, thanks for being on the podcast. If anyone wants to learn more about Passivhaus, if you want to connect with Andrew up in the Toronto area, please look him up on LinkedIn. And just want to say thank you for being on the podcast. I really appreciate you sharing some of this. It's been great.
Oh, thank you, Charlie, for the opportunity.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.